Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the podcast today. I am Mike Monteforti from Monteforti Law. As anybody knows that follows anything that I do, what I write, or the podcasts that I do, we are constantly looking for guests to come on the podcast that can enlighten the people that follow us and that listen to us. So we have, I'm really excited about this today. We have an amazing guest with us, Kelly James. Kelly, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on the podcast today. In means of just a brief intro, I had come across a story that Kelly wrote for the Huffington Post. It is a story about her children and about family. I'm gonna let her talk about it, but it's something that really resonated with me. As anybody that knows me knows already, that I'm married, I have 2 children, and that in my estate planning practice, I deal with a lot of the unfortunate things that happen in life. Someone passing away, whether or not they've planned accordingly, whether they've done a will or a trust or things like that. And it's a point that I often have to try to hammer home to people that these things are important. And when I find, someone that's kind of dealt with these issues and realized the importance of doing a proper plan and having discussions with your family, it's amazing to me every time I see it. So Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. So if you wouldn't mind, rather than have me blah blah blah, once I get going, I can talk all day. If you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about the story that you wrote, and we'll just have a conversation about it. And I just hearing it right from you, I think would be fantastic.
Sure. So I have a 16 and a half year old son and a daughter who will be 12 next month. And I will just warn you, I may cry during this recitation. I've told this story more than once, but it's still pretty raw. Their dad, I actually never called him my ex. I always called him my kid's dad, because that's who he is to me. And I feel like that takes away some of that negative connotation. And one of my friends said, well, it sounds like you were never married to him. And I was like, I don't care about that. I know I was. So anyway, we had been divorced for 4 years, and we had gotten to a really good place in our relationship. We lived a mile apart by design. The kids were with me the majority of the time for our custody arrangement, but after about the first year, we were able to get in a really good place in terms of our parenting. We talked or texted almost every day. If he was traveling, the kids were with me. If I had something going on, the kids could go there. And really, really important to people who are divorced. Of course, there was still some resentment and hard feelings on both sides. However, our kids saw that we were able to parent together and eventually sit together at our son's basketball games or swim meets, or he had me over to his house for dinner. I had him over here. I bought a pool table the day that they said that the kids weren't going back to school. I bought a pool table. I was like, well, we're screwed. We're stuck in this house forever. And he was the first person we had over to play. And looking back, I'm so glad we did all this, because my kids know that we still loved each other. We didn't want to be married anymore, but we still loved each other and we loved them. So it took away some of that, I think a little bit of the loss.
Sure.
But right around the time COVID started, maybe about a month in, he called me and he's like, hey, I can't take the kids tomorrow. And they were with me for 10 days and with him for 4. And sometimes by about, Sunday, I'd be like, oh, it's almost Wednesday, time to go to your dad's. And I was like, why not? Like, I was annoyed. And he said, I really don't feel well. And in fact, would you mind taking me to the doctor in the morning? This was at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, do you want to go now? He's like, no, but anyway, I thought he had COVID. He was having difficulty breathing. I put on a 95 and gloves. And I when I went to pick him up, he could barely get in my car. I mean, he was very, very sick. And I took him right to the emergency room. And of course, this is COVID. You drop him off and then you leave. And it turned out he had a pulmonary embolism, which is a big blood clot that gets stuck in your lungs. And he had the kind of actually a saddlebag where it sits on top of both of the lobes of your lungs. And having been a health writer, I knew what a pulmonary embolism was, and I knew he had a 20% chance of dying. He didn't die. He was in the ICU for, I think, 9 or 10 days. Picked him
Okay.
up and I picked him up at the hospital and then, they're getting him in the hospital or getting him in the car. And I looked over and I'm like, do they realize that I'm your ex-wife? Like, and he kind of laughed. And I said, I could have driven a lot more slowly to the hospital, just so we're clear. And he laughed. And
Right.
so he came home, went back to his house, and 4 or 5 months after that, he actually had a heart attack. And it's unusual to have a heart attack when you're on heavy duty blood thinners.
Right.
And our son actually, he said, I'm going to stay with dad. And so he stayed with Eric, and we shared a dog. And I went over there about 10 days before he died. And I was picking up our daughter and I said, what is going on? Like, who has a heart attack on blood thinners? Again, I was pissed. Like, I'm worried about him. And I said, I'm willing to take you to the grocery store. I'll bring the dog over for an hour or two. I'll bring you the cat. I mean, like, whatever, however I can help. I said, I really want our kids to have a dad. And he said, I do too. And I said, well, just know that I'm really concerned about you. And he said, I'm concerned too. And then I said, and again, I was a lawyer in my former life. I said, I know we won't need this, but have you thought about like writing down all your passwords and stuff? And he said, yeah, I've been thinking about that. And I said, well, I know we won't need it, but he was an IT guy, so very, very secure, all of his devices.
Okay.
He said, maybe that's just something you want to do. And I picked up Haley, came home with us, and then 10 days later, and my daughter would call me 3 or 4 times from her dad's, and she would call her dad a lot from here. Like, that was just how. So she's calling me, and I remember I almost didn't answer, and I said, hey, hi, honey, let me call you right back, because I was in the middle of something for work. And she said, Ryan thinks daddy's dead. And I said, I'm coming right now. And my boyfriend was at my house, and we got to Eric's house in probably 2 minutes. I mean, I literally had the keys. I was in the car. I remember I yelled at him because he was getting his shoes on. And I just said, no, please, no, the whole time.
Right.
And when we got there, the kids were in the dining room, and Eric was on the couch. And I've been CPR trained for a long time. And so we got him and just, if you ever do CPR, you need to get the person on the floor, not on a bed, not on a couch. You need a hard surface. So we got him on the floor, and I checked for a pulse, and he didn't have a pulse. So I immediately started CPR. And my boyfriend got the kids out of the room. And the EMTs got there when I was on my 3rd round of rescue breaths. A cop knelt down beside me and said, don't stop. And then, like, there were 8 people in the room. Like, it happened then. And so I remember somebody pushed me out of the way, and I remember thinking, where did they get a defibrillator? Like, I was like, where'd that come from? Because you're kind of in shock.
Yeah.
And so I gave him his medical history. And then they were working on him, but in retrospect, he was gone. Like, but I didn't have that in my mind yet. I just remember thinking, it doesn't look good. Like, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And so they took him in the ambulance. We took the kids and my dog to my house. I called my best friend to come over. And then Walt took me to the hospital. And when I went in, I said, my kid's dad was just brought here. I didn't say my ex-husband. And so they brought me in and they put me in a room. And when they put me in a room, I knew it was going to be bad.
You knew.
But I came home and told the kids, I don't want to talk about that part, but it was hard. And then Ryan said, Mom, we have to go to Dad's house. We have to go to Dad's house. And I said, why? And he said, there's a letter on the desk for us.
Okay.
And he had left them a letter, a really beautiful letter about how proud he was of them and how much he loved them. And a whole sheet of all of his passwords, every single one. So
what a wonderful thing that he just had that forethought to even to write that. I think that's
so that letter, selfishly, I wish it was 10 pages long. I wish he'd left videos. I wish, you know what I mean? But he left them a letter. And actually at his funeral, our son asked if I would read it. He wanted to read it, but he couldn't do it. And I did. Sure. And it was a nice testimony to Eric and how much he loved his kids. I'm still mad at him for dying. But as I've been processing this, I am a writer by trade and by avocation, I guess I would say. And I'd written an earlier essay about this, about the grief that I feel for my children, because they're never going to have their dad again. So everything that happens to them, their dad won't be there. And they don't really see that yet, but as an adult and as a parent, I see it. So I'm like grieving for them, for all these losses that they haven't had yet.
Sure.
But the other part of it is I was used to being a single parent, and I actually didn't mind being a single parent. I liked having a break. I really liked it. And I liked that I could, if I had something going on, I could say, hey, can you take the kids? Or can you pick Haley up from practice? Or can't, like we parented together. Selfishly, that's gone. Like it's all on me. And I had terrible anxiety the first couple of months after he died, which finally I was able to identify as, this is all on me now. Nothing can happen to me. Nobody loves these kids as much as I love these kids. Besides their dad. He's gone. So my way of coping with that anxiety was to get very, very serious about my health. And I've always been fairly healthy. I don't smoke. I will say weed is legal in Illinois. That's all I'll say. But I hadn't had a colonoscopy. I hadn't had a mammogram for 3 or 4 years. Because it just, I scheduled a bunch of medical appointments, and it has definitely changed how I live. And I joking, like everybody speeds on the highway. I mean, I barely speed anymore. I always wear my seatbelt, but I'm much more careful, and I'm much more aware that if something happens to me, these kids are lost. And as part of that, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a widower, and his kids were younger than mine, 7, 5, and 3 when his wife died. And he said, you have to tell them what the plan is, because they may not say it, but they're afraid something will happen to you. So I actually, after I got all this stuff done, and I wrote a new will, and I put all my stuff into a living revocable trust. And then I really thought about who the guardians of my kids were going to be. And it's not someone in my family. It's actually our neighbors, because they're really close to us, and they have a son my daughter's age, and they would parent much in the way I parent. And there was just a lot of reasons for that. And I sat them down and I walked them through this whole process. And several of my friends were like, I can't believe you would talk to your kids about it. That's morbid. And like, they're afraid I will die. And I may. I'm doing everything I can not to die. But if I die, here's what will happen. This is what your life will look like. And I think that helped with some of the anxiety. The last thing I'll say is, when I went in there to sign my new will, I almost threw up, because it was that, I was like, oh my God, what if this happens? But I was so relieved after it was done. So it's, I think that as an adult and as a parent, yes, it makes you anxious. Yes, it makes you scared. Yes, you don't want to think about it, but you're going to die. I'm going to die. Hopefully not for another 30 years, 40 years.
Sure.
But in doing so, it helped me tremendously. And I can say I'm not actively, consciously doing anything to shorten my lifespan right now. I'm not smoking cigarettes. I exercise. I'm doing my mindful. So you can't control when you're going to die, but you can control some of the risks. And I feel like I did that well. That was barely a conversation, Mike. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm a talker too.
No, exactly. And I think that was perfect. And, again, reading your story when I came across it, and the way that you wrote it, and it was written beautifully, was, again, here we are, we did all this work to get to this place where we can co-parent together. And then, you have the rug pulled out from under you. And with a part of your story where I read about this phone call was, I was at my desk at work, and I had to stop and return to it later, because I didn't want to cry at work. And I was picturing my children on the other side of that phone call, whether they were calling about, their mom about me, or calling me about her. And I just, it definitely put me in a place where I said, okay, I don't want to cry at my desk. I got to think about this later. And, I do this every day. part of the challenge of my job is to get people to understand that, yes, we're all going to die, and we want to do the best we can to make sure that it's way, way, way in the future.
Right.
But if it's not, because like you said, we can cut down the risk as best we can, but there's no way to cut it out completely. And if somehow the worst should happen, can we do something to make sure that our kids are taken care of? And I think beyond just writing the documents, the fact that you say I had a conversation with my kids about this, I have to tell you, doing this day in and day out, it's a rare thing for someone to sit down with their kids and talk to them about, here's what happens if I'm not here. Here's what it would look like. Here's what your life would look like, and you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
People don't do it. And some days I just, the reason I don't have any hair, it's because I pulled it out from people driving me crazy. Okay. Because I try and tell them that these things are important, and, that this is a conversation you can have with your kids, if they're mature enough to handle it, which you as the parent know when that's the right time. And if you discuss that with them, I think, you talked about the relief when you went in and signed, new documents. Well, again, if your kids are worried that you're going to die and you have this conversation with them about it, taking some of their anxiety or their worry away because they know that there's something in place,
Yeah.
should, God forbid, anything happen to you. I wish that every single person that came in to see me would do the same thing. So when you say, well, friends of mine said, I can't believe that, that you had that conversation with your kids.
Yeah.
Every day I'm telling people you need to have this conversation, and they're resistant to it, right? It's not a pleasant conversation. I get that, but it's reality. The other thing that I try and tell people to do is something that your kid's father did do, right? Writing them a letter. And I like how you said you wish it was 10 pages, right? So I'm a talker and a writer by trade as well. And once I start, it goes on and on and on and on. And I have pages of things that I've written to my kids if anything were to happen to me. And the fact that he had the forethought to do it, I think is one of those things that, again, it's rare, because clients that come in and see me, whether they do a will or they're writing a letter to their family, somehow they think it's giving permission for them to die. And I say, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You're here trying to put something in place in case the worst should happen, so that the kids are taken care of. It's peace of mind for you. The kids know that they're going to be taken care of, so it's peace of mind for them.
Yeah.
I also love how you said regarding guardianship that you didn't choose someone that was in your own family because you had another option available to you that you thought would work well for your kids' lives. And that's not an easy decision to make either. None of us want to contemplate when we're not going to be here, and we don't want anyone raising our kids but us, of course. But if we're not here, what's going to be the best option for them, the least amount of stress for them, and that's going to give them the parenting in a similar way.
Right.
And some people have that in family members, some people have it in friends. And the fact that you're able to think about that and look at that objectively and say, this is the right decision for my kids, and then talk to them about it. My hat's off to you, because people don't do it. I mean, was that something when you kind of realized you had to have this conversation with them? Was it something that you had to kind of talk yourself into, like, okay, I know I got to do this, but I'll do it tomorrow, but I'll do it the next day,
Yeah.
but I'll do it the next day. It's so hard.
I'm in case you can't tell, I'm a pretty transparent person, and I transparently parent, like, with intention. A couple things I would say. The day that Eric died, I put Haley to bed first, and she was crying, I was crying. And when I went into my son's room, so he was 15 and a half at the time, and I said, I want to be really, really clear about something. And I said, your job is to be a kid. I said, my job is to take care of you and your sister. I can do it. I can do it. I will do it. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is take care of yourself. I will take care of you. I will take care of Haley. I was crying as I said this, but I said I can do it. And then later my mom said, I hope you didn't say anything like you're the man of the house. And no. And so I think it's important, like, let's say this hadn't happened to Eric. Let's say it had happened to one of my kids' friends' dads.
Sure.
That fear may be in my kids. I don't know. So I'm just saying, I can see people listening to this. Well, if you have two parents, you're thinking, yeah, well, we don't really have to have this discussion, but your kids may be afraid anyway. So I had already been pretty open with them about some stuff. And then there was some issues with Eric's estate and that just involving various family members. And I was open with them. I said, here's what's going on. This is what's happening. And I said, but the bottom line is, I'm your mom. I can get us through this. We will be okay. That's my refrain. We will be okay. It will be okay. And so when I started thinking, I have two brothers and a sister. Well, one brother and his wife, they live 45 minutes away, but they have 3 kids of their own already. And he travels a lot for work. And then my other brother has 2 kids of his own, plus he's engaged. And his fiance has an adult daughter and she has 2 little girls. So you start adding up all the kids.
Yeah.
Then my sister and her wife have a daughter who's graduating from high school. They're ready to be done. They don't want to, you know what I mean? So I looked at this and then I was like, if I want my kids' lives to stay as close as they are now, well, my next door neighbor's son is my daughter's age, and they're not going to go anywhere until Brandon graduates from high school. They know my family. They know my kids. They are our family. And the days after Eric died, they sent us dinner. They were here completely. And remember, it was COVID, so it was a shit show anyway.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's who it should be. And the funny thing is, we don't agree on politics, so we don't talk politics.
Right.
But I knew that if something were to happen to me, the kids would feel secure there. And that's what it was. So when I had all my ducks in a row, I sat down and I said, and here's what I'm thinking. I thought about Uncle Andy, blah, blah, blah. I thought about Uncle Mark, blah, blah, blah. I thought about Aunt Steffi. And I said, but I think the right people are the Ballos, and this is why. And when I explained it, they got it. And I think because, again, I wouldn't want them to have to move to a different house. I wouldn't want them to move someplace where now they've had this extra trauma. Now they're starting over. Now they have to negotiate with their cousins. Just seems like a lot. And again, every family's different. So, and then again, my daughter's almost 12. So this is only 6 more years. So they need, parents or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a hard conversation, but sorry, when your kid's dad drops dead, suddenly you have a lot of hard conversations. And the other thing I'd add, having talked to, because I got a lot of emails after that story ran, like from people all across the country. I got an email from Katie Couric. It was like a fangirl moment. But I lost my train of thought. I got a lot of emails talking about what a loss this is, and it'll come back to me. But the point I wanted to make was, it's definitely made my kids and I even closer. Like we're a very tight little unit.
Yeah.
And they know that let's say I had a horrible health diagnosis, I would tell them, like, that's just how I'm going to parent from here on out.
Yeah.
Some people probably think I tell my kids too much. I probably do, but that's just the nature of it. So, but yeah, when I still remember looking at the will, and I almost had to excuse myself because I was like, I'm going to puke. And it was just that anxiety of what if something happens to me, but not having a will won't make it not happen to me. It just will be a mess if it does, when it does, right?
It'll be messier later. Exactly. And I think similarly, I'm very transparent. My wife and I with our kids, and they're a little older, almost 18, and my son's over 16. So, I'm transparent with them, but at the same time, what you were saying about, that your neighbors, that they're like family. You don't have to be related by blood or marriage to be family.
I 1000% agree with that.
You just don't. So, I mean, I have my leadership team here at the office, my 2 managers, Ashley and Nicole. They are like my family. We are not related by blood or by marriage, but they are my family. So, When I look at something similar, it's thinking along the same lines as what you were. So I have one sister, she's got 4 kids.
Yeah,
How can I saddle her with two more, you
exactly.
know? And then my other sister doesn't have any kids. So how do I get, take her to go from no children to now, here you go,
Right.
here's two that you have now, money aside, guess what? Now you need to,
Yeah,
raise these 2 kids at least until, until they're adults. So my wife and I joke that my daughter is almost 18, so we got to make it just a few more months, and then
I
and
gotcha.
then she can be the guardian for my son. God forbid anything happens to us, and we don't have to worry about where they're going to go if something happens to us. But it's a conversation that we had to have with them. It's a conversation we had to have with the guardians that we did choose, and family is family. Blood, marriage, it doesn't matter. You don't need to have that to consider someone, family,
Well, and I just thought of what I wanted to say. I think the reason a lot of people put off their wills when they have children is and I'm going to write a piece about this. It's the hardest question you ever ask as a parent. It's who will the guardians be? And when our son was about 2, I had been pushing Eric. I was like, we've got to get wills done. And he's, I don't want to, blah, blah, blah. And so I got what I wanted. I knew that I wanted my one brother to be Ryan's guardian were something to happen to us, because he was the closest to Ryan and the youngest. And at the time he didn't have children, and he and his wife, you know what I mean? Like Ryan knew them and loved them. I was like, they could,
Yeah.
it'll be, and they were going to have kids. That would be fine. And then I wanted my other brother to be in charge of the money because he's really good with money, because I wanted it to be two. So I won. I got who I wanted. And then we named a couple people from Eric's family as the backups. But remember, I was a lawyer in my former life. So I was like, once we have mine, I'm like, okay, let's go sign this. But I think and I've had this discussion with several of my friends. The people you pick when your baby's a baby may not be the same person you want when your kid's 5 or 10, or maybe circumstances have changed. And it is a really hard discussion. So for me, I didn't have to agree with anybody who it was going to be, which is good. On the other hand, it's completely up to me, the responsibility for that decision. So,
Yeah.
But I'm like I said, I think that's why people put it off. They argue about it, or they can't agree, so they just put it in the corner and hope that it never comes up.
Yeah, exactly. And, like you mentioned, things do change over time. So who you might pick when your child is young might not be the same people that you would pick when they're 10 or 12. And that's another thing that I see a lot in my business is someone might do a will or some estate planning when their kids are 2 or 3 years old,
Right.
put it in the drawer, and they never look at it again. Meanwhile, the individuals that they picked, maybe they moved away, maybe they have, 6 kids now, maybe, so for us, it's a lifelong process, because as your life changes, your plan needs to be able to roll with that and change accordingly. And like you, I have different people in charge as far as guardianship versus the money. I have another family member, my cousin, who's really good with money, and so he's going to be in charge of the money. And I've got somebody else to be guardians for the kids, but it's not the same person. I've got these 2 individuals with separate, jobs, if you will, because that's how I think it's going to work out best, for my kids. But, and knock on wood, come next year, my daughter will turn 18 and we can breathe a sigh of relief, and, and we've made it.
Well,
but you're right.
Yeah. And the other part of that is I wanted, thinking this through, let's say something at the time we're married and something happens to both of us. I didn't want the guardian of the person, the actual person who's raising your child, to be in charge of that child's money. Because let's say Ryan wants a car when he turns 16, and the guardian and his, my brother or whoever it is says no, because he's also trying to keep that money saved for college. Now, again, as a parent, that's a different decision. But when you're in loco parentis, you're acting as a parent, it just made more sense to me to split those responsibilities. And in my experience as a former lawyer, that often helped people, because then they're like, oh, well, we don't have to give it all to one person. If we can split it, then, you've got more than one person acting in the best interest of your kids. And that, you kind of because to me, the most important thing was who's going to raise the kid, like
Yeah.
who's going to be the best parent if I'm not here to parent? That's the question.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that's funny. We think alike then, because that's the classic example I give when I'm talking to clients is my son wanting to buy a car.
Yeah.
And, that I've got someone else in charge of the money, so that when my son at 16 and a half says, I want $200,000 for a Lamborghini,
Right.
I want my cousin to come back and say, you know what, maybe we'll look at a car for you, but that's not the car we're looking at. Okay.
Right.
We're going to maybe look at something a little more reasonable to get you back and forth to school. Because otherwise, if he had his way, he'd be tearing it up and down the street and would spend, all the money on God knows what, he'd have a garage,
feel that.
full
I
and have no
understand.
money for college. So I think that, again, when I came across your story, how much it resonated with me, I think it will resonate, with the people that follow us and watch the podcast and listen to our stuff. So I thank you again for taking the time to do this. I would love to, I loved what you wrote already. So if you do end up writing an additional piece about it, I want to see it, because I loved what you wrote. It moved me. It really did. I'm going to put a link up to the article so that anybody that follows our stuff can go and read it for themselves. Because it just, like I said, it moved me to tears at my desk, to the point where I needed to go back and visit it later. And I said to my team, we need to talk to her. I need to have a conversation with her. So I can't thank you enough.
I would say, as I said, I probably have had 50 or 60 emails from people throughout the country, and the overwhelming, and many people just said it was great. I really made me think, thank you. But from a lot of people who had lost a former spouse, and said, thank you, because I have this grief, not just for me, but for my kids, but it's because your exes, it's like, if I was a widow, I would have been treated differently. And that's okay. I'm not a widow, but definitely speaks to, of course, as a culture, we're not good with death and we're not good with grief. But I think the last thing I would say is, it's not what I would have picked, but my kids and I are in a good spot. And I know what I wanted to say before was, it's okay for your kids to see you scared and upset and crying, and then they've seen all that, but they saw me lose my temper more than once, but they never thought that I wasn't going to keep them safe. Like, they've seen me really, really upset, but they've never seen me totally lose my shit. And I think that's what parents need to keep in mind too. Like, all of us have blown up at our kids and then apologize, but my kids know I will get really angry, but I'm always here until I'm not going to be here. So I don't think I made my point very well, but when you're doing the best you can do, it's usually way better than enough. That makes sense. So.
Agreed. And it's funny. That's how I try to be with my kids. But when I was growing up, it was a very different thing. I came from, all Italian family, old school, superstitious. You didn't talk about death. You didn't talk about important things like that in front of the kids. You didn't let the kids see you cry. You didn't, let the kids see you or anything other than, this perfect, mountain statue of strength at all times. And I remember that growing up. And it's at a certain age, I started to realize that, hey, this is baloney. My parents are real people, and they have fears and emotions. And, I kind of, it taught me that's, as much as I had a great upbringing, that wasn't how I wanted to be with my kids. I wanted, some of that transparency, like we talk about. And so it's okay for them to see us as real people. So that's a great point. All right, I won't keep you any longer.
All right,
Kelly,
thank you. I really enjoyed talking to Mike.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.